Well, Happy New Year to everyone watching, and thanks so much for tuning in to the Ben Drury Show. Wow, what a great college football playoff quarterfinals we just witnessed. We had four games, four great games, and there's a few things we found out. Well, first off, the first round bye curse is solved, it's broken. Well, kind of. We'll talk about that. And Ole Miss now has two college football playoff wins, two more than Lane Kiffin has. And guess how many Lane Kiffin has? A whomping zero. Saw that sign at the All-State Sugar Bowl. We'll talk about that as well. Today on the show, we'll discuss all four quarterfinal games, and I'll tell you everything you need to know about this week. So, why waste any more time? And let's get started. I'm Ben Drury, and this is the Ben Drury Show, so don't go anywhere. Well, Wednesday night, New Year's Eve, I believe it was Wednesday. Yes, it was Wednesday. Wednesday night, we had a great matchup, and that was the game between Miami and Ohio State in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic. Down in Arlington, Texas, Jerry World, whatever you want to call it. And I have titled on my notes right here is that Miami shocks the world, upsets Ohio State 24-14. And that's truly what this game was. And down goes Ohio State. Miami shocks the world and upsets and defeats the reigning national champion. And for the majority of this year, for the majority of this season, Ohio State looked unbeatable. They looked like they were going to go on and win another national championship just like they did last year. However, we can now see they're out of the college football playoff, and instead of being their two-loss team, their season is done and it's over because Miami stepped up big time and won this matchup in this game. Now, some things to remember, and earlier in this week, last week, I guess it was probably Tuesday, I believe, in the preview, I said that there's one thing that needed to happen for Miami to win, and it was this. Get the magic number in sacks. Now, what is that magic number, you may be asking? It's 5. You can hold it on one hand. 5 is the magic number for sacks. And so Ohio State, they lost 2 times this season. And in that first loss, it was against Indiana. And you guessed it, Indiana was able to sack Julian Sayin 5 times in that matchup. So it seems pretty simple. The winning recipe, the recipe for success in this matchup for Miami would be sack Julian Sayin 5 times. And with the final score, as you can see down below, 24-14 for Miami, we can see that Miami was able to do that, and they come away with the win, 24-14. They live to see another day, another game, if you will, and they will play upcoming. I believe the next game will be on January 8th. No. Okay, I'm not 100% sure when the next game will be, but we'll figure that out, and we'll have more content surrounding that. And so, to put it simply, I mean, we can see this based on the box score, final score, whatever, assuming that, Julian Sayin, Heisman quarterback, Heisman candidate quarterback, I believe redshirt freshman, I can't 100% remember where his eligibility is at. Well, Ohio State lost by 10 points, so it's pretty easy to tell that Julian Sayin was pressured and didn't have the best game ever. However, that was not the case by any measure of quarterback success. Miami pressured Sayin well, and not only is that reflected in that Julian Sayin was sacked 5 times, but it's the fact that Julian Sayin threw 2 interceptions, where he's had 8 total interceptions all year. So a quarter of that comes from just one game in this Cotton Bowl. So props to Miami. Great job getting after Julian Sayin. However, Sayin got his. He got his, though. And besides getting sacked 5 times and throwing 2 interceptions, Julian Sayin went 22 of 35, and threw for 385 yards and had a touchdown. So if you take out the interceptions from that stat line, that's a pretty solid game. That's a pretty solid quarterback performance for Julian Sayin. However, Miami was able to make the difference in that, we're going to let Ohio State is going to get some chunks. They're going to get some chunks in the pass game, whatever it may be, but we're going to stop them when they start to get a little bit too much progress. We can't let them get ahead of themselves. And that's what Miami was able to do. Those 2 interceptions, limit scoring. And yes, Ohio State puts up 14 points on the board, but whenever you're going up against a team like Ohio State who can score at their own will against any team in the country, this is holding them to 14 points is a large win. Now, one of the other things I said in the preview, that was going to have to lead to the success of this Miami program, was the performance of their quarterback, Carson Beck. And so it's not a matter of Carson Beck not being fazed by the big scene, because he's been able to perform in those big games like he did for Georgia. And so that wasn't the question. What he did need to do was just have a good game, period. He just needed to have a good game, because he's had very, very bad games this season, whether it be against SMU or in their other loss against Louisville. Some people calling him Carson Pick. Heck, some of my friends have been calling him that. But having a good game for Carson Beck in this game did not necessarily mean that he needs to throw for X amount of yards. He needs to have this amount of touchdowns. But it more means that he needs to be put in the areas he needs to be put in situations to succeed. And I have it written right here. Carson Beck had the game that he needed to have. And in the preview show, I said that Miami's success hindered on Carson Beck's success. And, well, obviously, you could be sitting at home and being like, well, yeah, Ben, that's kind of what happens. The Carson Beck quarterback is the point guard. If he has success, of course the team has success. But it's not as simple as that. It's as simple as, okay, Carson Beck, he could maybe not throw for 3 touchdowns. Like, he doesn't need 4 touchdowns, but he can't have an interception. He can't have 2 interceptions. So that is what it means by having a good game. Almost having a good game is just not having a bad one, because those aren't necessarily always tied together. It's not just a one or the other. It's a spectrum like that. And playing a good game it means that Carson Beck, he needed to control the ball, and he was able to do that. And I put, more specifically, Miami needs to put Beck in positions to fail so that he can succeed. And they did that. And that is why Miami won this matchup, along with great defensive performance from that defensive line and that linebacker unit, and great secondary play. Ohio State, going into this matchup, has some of the, and they still do, has some of the best weapons in college football. Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, and I've said their names so much. Everyone in the media has said their names so much, but it's true. And for Miami to hold those weapons to, I don't have the specific stats for them, but to limit the Ohio State offense, which is very explosive, for Miami to limit them to that amount of points is a big, big win. And not only in the college football playoff, it's always next game. You win one and you go on to the next. It's not like a bowl game where, oh, we won on the next season. Like, Miami plays next week. So, and they're going to be able to take that performance on to the next one. They face off against Ole Miss. Ole Miss, and this isn't the next round preview show. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. However, Ole Miss, very explosive offense. So if I'm Mario Cristobal and I'm able to kind of compare, okay, this was our performance against Ohio State, and this could maybe help to predict how we're going to do against Ole Miss, when some may say Ole Miss is has a little bit less of an explosive offense. Yes, Miami is seated lower than Ole Miss in the college football playoff rankings. We'll get into our traditional preview show. We'll get into the BTN Top 25. Actually, that may be its own standalone show. However, we'll get into that. And actually, Miami may be favored in that game. So we'll see what happens. All right, that's the Cotton Bowl. On to the next one. This was yesterday morning, 11 a.m. kick. I think I missed the kickoff. I slept in too late. And I don't even sleep in that often. So that's saying something. Well, with an early kickoff, let's just say, first off, this game was held at Hard Rock Stadium. And I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but wow, Hard Rock Stadium as a day game is so different than games at night. That's all I'll have to say about that. Whose problem is that? I don't know. That's for you to decide. But with the 11 a.m. kick, let's just say Oregon traveled well. Traveling from all the way in Eugene to Miami, Florida, that's a long way to go. Heck, Texas Tech had a long way to go, but Oregon was a little bit farther. But they did not let that early kickoff phase them. And Oregon followed the game plan perfectly. And they did something that very few are able to do in college football. And, more specifically in the college football playoff. I don't know how many times this has been done, but Oregon was able to shut out a team and allowing them to not even make a field goal. No point, and score 0. They couldn't get, and it wasn't even a fact of like, okay, Texas Tech got into the red zone, and then Oregon turned them over, and then they went the other way. That happened a few times, but that wasn't always the case. There was 3rd and outs in Texas Tech territory. Just a great defensive performance from Oregon. And it would be one thing saying, okay, Oregon shut out this random FCS school, because they couldn't even shut out, I believe, Montana State when they played them earlier in the season. Even Montana State put up points against Oregon. So Texas Tech, and that's to say Texas Tech and Montana State or any other opponent are not the same team. And Oregon shutting out Texas Tech is probably one of the best performances in college football this year. I'm not going to list all the other ones, but that's a great, great performance from Oregon. And Dan Lanning obviously is going to be very happy. But going forward, just like Mario Cristobal with the Ohio State win, it's definitely a very big confidence-infusing win, especially because Oregon's going on to play the number 1 team in the country, who I believe is actually the best team in the country. Now, leading into this matchup, and heck, I fed into it as well. Leading into this matchup, Texas Tech appeared to be one of the top teams in the country based on statistics. That's not saying that Texas Tech isn't one of the best teams in the country, because they deserve to be in the college football playoff. I'm not here to say, oh, yeah, they shouldn't have been in the college football playoff. However, what I am saying is that Oregon looked at all the statistics, looked at all of the defensive, offensive, special teams numbers from Texas Tech, and saw that, Texas Tech has the best explosive offense in the country. And Oregon just asked a simple rhetorical question. Who cares? Oregon just asked, who cares about the statistics? And that's how Oregon played. They threw those out the window. And Dante Moore, not fazed whatsoever. Bryson Betcher, not fazed whatsoever. And Oregon, not only did Oregon play well, but they also just didn't allow Texas Tech to play Texas Tech football. It wasn't like Oregon just outmatched them so much. Texas Tech still came to play a little bit, but Oregon forced Texas Tech to just play completely differently. And that is what a good team does in college football. Moving on, Oregon forced 2 very costly interceptions late in this matchup. And one of them, and this was one of the most important factors in this game, and that factor was Texas Tech's quarterback, Behren Morton. Now, whenever you put 0 points on the scoreboard, you're probably going to shift a lot of that blame to the quarterback. That's not what I'm going to do. And I'm also not going to shift blame on the play calling, wide receivers dropping passes, whatever it may be. But I'm not even giving blame whatsoever. I'm shifting the focus once again back on that Oregon defense. And that Oregon was able to do something that is the most important thing for any team's defensive success. And that is making the quarterback uncomfortable. And that is what Oregon did in this matchup. And that's what led to those 2 costly interceptions. And since Oregon was able to make Behren Morton uncomfortable, they come out victorious and are heading to the semifinals. Those 2 interceptions, not good whatsoever on Behren Morton's record, but also it wasn't the Julian Sayin situation where Julian Sayin was able to throw very well and then he just got intercepted on a few bad plays and didn't really let it affect him that much. That wasn't the case. Behren Morton did not have a good game whatsoever, and those interceptions were just more salt in the wound. And it's unfortunate. Texas Tech, storybook season, high school coach to the top ranks of college football, Joey McGuire. Jacob Rodriguez, who I believe got snubbed from the Heisman podium. Greatest mustache in college football. Maybe even the greatest mustache in college football history. So it was a great, great story. And it's unfortunate we won't be able to see them again. However, I do know that Oregon was able to survive the test. And heck, they got an A+. They did not scrape through with a B minus. No, they are going on to the next round knowing we did this and we did it well. And that is confidence inducing for Dan Lanning. Now, while the Oregon defense did in large part carry the weight, Oregon's offensive unit wasn't dead weight in the slightest. And Dante Moore played a great game backing up Oregon's defense with points. So this could have very well been a 14-0 game. Or, that being the defense gets 2 pick sixes and then offense can't do anything, but it's a defensive battle, but one defense was able to score and the other wasn't. So those are the only points of the game. That wasn't the case. 23-0, final score. You can see it down there. And so inherently, that means the offense put up points. And that's the most that is how college football works. Obviously, Ben, great point. What are you doing? But I just lined out. I already highlighted the steps. Moore, who was snubbed from the top 10 in Heisman voting, I wasn't aware of his game that much. I didn't, and that this is not me saying that I necessarily doubted him, but I wasn't familiar with his game. And so he shocked me a little bit in this matchup. He went 26 of 33 for 234 yards. He didn't throw a touchdown and did have an interception, but he put his teams in positions to succeed and lengthen the lead. So it was not a matter of, okay, he had a few checkdowns and didn't really do too much, and he had a very high completion percentage because they were easy to make throws. That's not true. He had a lot of very hard throws that were hard to make, but he was getting his team in the red zone with his arm and then was handing it off to his running backs, more specifically Jordan Davison, who ran for 2 touchdowns. And Moore put Davison in positions for short gains and touchdowns on this level. And this was shown by, Davison finishes the matchup with 2 touchdowns, but he only has 42 yards. So if you take away those touchdowns, maybe only give him 1. That's not the best running back performance ever. But that is made in large part because of Dante Moore's quarterback performance. Now, Oregon will move on. Like I said, they'll move on to face Indiana. And like Oregon moving on, we will also move on. And actually, subtle foreshadowing, we're going to talk about the Hoosiers, Indiana. The Rose Bowl, presented by Prudential. Most beautiful stadium in all of college football. And wow, what a surprise. Why am I not saying Faurot Field? Well, okay, guys, come on. I can see beauty. And so that was weird. Okay. So the Hoosiers, I have it listed here, and you can see it in the bottom third. Hoosiers defy history and dominate Alabama 38-3. This was a sheer and utter domination. And the final score shows it. And 38-3 is exactly how the game went. It was not a matter of, maybe it was closer, like Alabama got unlucky in some circumstances. But if it was that case, the final score would be 21-3, not 38. Not 38-3. So, wow. This is truly what pure domination looks like. And Indiana did what a lot can't do. They forgot about the past completely. And Indiana is truly now, more than ever, they are not a Texas Tech where they're just a storybook ending. They're just a storybook team. No. They've done this 2 years in a row, and they are the future of college football. I mean, just look at it. Transfer quarterback Fernando Mendoza. Perfect representation of what it means to have a transfer portal team. Because almost the vast majority of those starters are from the transfer portal, and a good chunk of them are from James Madison following Kurt Signetti, the head coach, who I'm not even going to talk about him that much because he is that good. I mean, you can just go watch his interviews. You can tell how cool of a guy he is. I would love to have a sit-down conversation with him. Who knows what'll happen? But just a fun little statistic, or I guess not a statistic, a fact more. Indiana, this is their first bowl game win since 1991. I think ESPN, the amount of times they showed graphics like that showing that, okay, this is their first win, and then showing how many wins Alabama has or all of these things. And that just kind of bumps down the gravity of this game. Or I guess maybe just it makes it seem that Indiana being here is a 1 in a million possibility, and that they're just on this historically chasing run, and that is their main purpose. But that is not true. And like I said, they're not a storybook team. Like they are a true contender built from nothing, and they're going to be here for a while. So it's not the same thing whatsoever. Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winner, played an excellent, and I'll say a Heisman performance in this game. And, he shows the voters, he shows the critics, whatever it may be, he shows them why he truly deserved to win this award. And he definitely boosts his stock going into the future. Mendoza threw for 192 yards on 14 of 16 passing, and he had 3 touchdowns. And it's pretty simple math. He had more touchdowns than he had incompletions. And yes, I realize he only threw 16 passes. But on any scale, in having incompletion, having just 2 incomplete passes is a very, very good feat. And that's especially considering that Alabama has a good defensive front, good secondary, and that's considering in the first drive, the first series of this game, Mendoza was sacked 2 times. So he was facing a large deal of pressure. So only incompletes 2 passes. Bravo, Fernando Mendoza. Great game. Have yourself a ball game. 192 yards. So that's very, very good. He had a lot of just wow. I think on the first, it was 0-0 ball game. It was a 0-0 ball game, and Charlie Becker, I believe is his name, number 80, and Fernando Mendoza just puts a ball on a silver platter, passes it up to Charlie Becker, and wow, I think it was like maybe a 40-yard gain, and it was just what a throw, like a Heisman throw from Mendoza, and that's what it was. I'm not going to talk too much more about it, but that's what this game was. A Heisman performance. Mendoza averages about 13.7 per pass, per completion, and that's just great. And he was able to do that, and I just mentioned that Mendoza was sacked 2 times in the early possessions of this matchup. And he was able to bounce back from that because of the MVP of this game. Pat Coogan, center, I believe, or member of the offensive line. And Pat Coogan and the full offensive line unit for Indiana, they win the offensive player of the game. And yeah, they should have. And I'm not trying to change anyone's opinion there. But whenever you're reaching long story short, I'm rambling. Mendoza was able to have the game he had because of his offensive line front. And whenever you're going up against Oregon, who also has a great pass attack, who has a great defensive front, that's what you need. That's what you need from Indiana. And that is just great. That's great. That is great for Fernando Mendoza and that roster. So Alabama hasn't been able to run the ball well all season long, and this game was truly no different. But it speaks as a testament, even if you were playing a team with a bad rush offense, it still is a defensive feat to hold that team to limited rushing yards. And Alabama was able to do that. And to the point where Ty Simpson, who didn't even play the large amount of the second half, was the highest rusher on that team, was the highest yardage runner for Alabama. And so it speaks as a testament to just how good the Indiana rush defense is and how much of a trouble it will be for Oregon in the semifinal. A key to this game going into the matchup was Indiana's ability to make Alabama play a brand of football that wasn't their own. Very similar to what Oregon did to Texas Tech, Indiana did to Alabama. And honestly, we should have all seen this coming. This has happened to Alabama many, many times this season. It happened in the first game against Oklahoma. It happened in the SEC championship game against Georgia. And it happened in the first quarter against that college football playoff first round game against Oklahoma, their second matchup of the year, where Alabama tends to just play the offense, play the brand of football that the opposing team is forcing them to play. And while in that Oklahoma matchup the second time, Alabama was able to bounce back, keep poised, and was able to bounce back and play their brand of football. That was not the case in this game. Indiana kept them under pressure the whole time. And Alabama, and I said in the preview show, I actually think this might have gotten cut off a little bit because we were having some network issues, was that this matchup for Indiana was very similar to them playing Ohio State. That's not me saying that Ohio State and Alabama are comparable teams. However, I do think that their offensive schemes are very similar for Alabama and Ohio State. Meaning, actually, I'm not even going to say the whole offensive scheme, just the pass attack. Because Ohio State, very explosive offensive attack in the passing game. And they have a very good complementary system of football. And Alabama is not complimentary, but they have a very explosive passing attack, whether it be with Latia Brooks, Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams when he's able to play somewhat to his standard, whatever it may be. They have a very, very good explosive passing attack. So Indiana had the challenge set out for them. And Indiana did well in that front. Did very, very well. And that comes down in large part to quarterback play and quarterback pressure, but it also just has to do with secondary defense, being able to shut down those receivers in the secondary. But getting back to the quarterback conversation, in this game, Ty Simpson went out with an injury, causing the backup Austin Mack to step in and lead the Crimson Tide. And what I'm going to read right here just goes to show how bad of a game Ty Simpson had, even before he was injured, even before he got injured and taken out of the game. Considering that Mack and Simpson had the same amount of passing attempts, 16, Mack did better. He completed one less pass than Simpson, but he had 36 more yards. 36 more yards. I believe he put just over 100 yards in total in that game. So, and that's not me saying, oh, wow, great, Austin Mack. Here's your flowers. Here's some roses. Haha, that was cliche because of the Rose Bowl. That's not me saying that whatsoever. However, it does go to show that this was the situation of the game. And quarterback play was very, very important in this matchup. Indiana defensive front way to get after the quarterback. There was one situation where Ty Simpson, he was able to complete or at least not give up any distance, where Indiana came out in their defensive front. They came out like a steaming bullet. Like the bullet out of the chamber. And they came sprinting at Ty Simpson, causing him to run backwards. I believe it was about 20 yards. He had to run 20 yards backwards to escape the defensive front from Indiana. And that was the testament of this game. That's how the game went. Indiana got at the quarterback well, and that caused limited offensive production, just 3 points on the scoreboard for the Crimson Tide. And we're now sitting here once again with a very embarrassing performance to end the year for Alabama. Very subpar. Last year they lost to Michigan in, I can't remember which bowl game it was, but they lose to them there. They missed the college football playoffs. Yes, Alabama wins a first-round playoff game, but that's kind of outweighed by getting blown out by 35 points. And I don't think it's a matter of, oh, you got blown out by Indiana. That's not the case because Indiana truly is. They are a good team. And I'm not going to say they're not a storybook because I already said that, and I'm not a broken record. But that was the case. Alabama ends the season. 4-loss team. 4 losses on the season, I believe. And that's just not what you want to see if you're Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer is going to stay. He's not going to leave. Some people may want him to leave because, you're not putting up Nick Saban numbers anymore. Well, obviously, Nick Saban's Nick Saban. But that's enough about that one. Our final game of the weekend. I say weekend. It was not the weekend. It was Thursday night. Just goes to show how much of a time warp it is in winter break. But the All-State Sugar Bowl. What a game. This was truly a great nightcap and a great end to the already great slate of college football playoff quarterfinals that we got to watch and experience. First round of the college football playoff, a little bit lackluster, and that's due to in large part because of the Tulane and James Madison appearances. But this quarterfinal game, I don't think it had a miss. Maybe the Rose Bowl game that we just talked about was a little bit of a miss, but who cares? At halftime, in this matchup, it looked like Georgia was on the brink of pulling away from Ole Miss. And as a somewhat Ole Miss supporter, actually not a somewhat, I'm on the Ole Miss train. It's not the Lane train anymore. It's the Pete Golding train. It's the Trinidad Winidad Chambliss. We'll talk about him in a second. But I've been on that train. Shout out Kylan Craig, one of my best friends. We've been on the Trinidad Chambliss train since day one. Since the very, very early moments in the season. So props to him, props to me, not to toot my horn a little bit too much, but get back on topic. I think pretty much everyone, probably even the broadcast team, and maybe even Pete Golding, got a little bit nervous. At halftime. Ole Miss, at halftime, it looked like Georgia was on the brink of pulling away from Ole Miss as they were losing by 9 points, 21-12 at the break. And going into the locker room, I think it was Molly McGrath asked Pete Golding, permanent head coach, she asked him, what's it going to take to get this comeback? And he answered the question, and they showed on the screen that Ole Miss's largest comeback up until this point in the season was 10 points. And that's going to infuse a little bit of confidence. It's going to infuse a little bit of faith if you're an Ole Miss fan. But here's the thing. I'm not 100% sure who that 10-point comeback was to, but I know for a fact it wasn't against Georgia. Georgia, the third-ranked team in the country, third-seeded team in the country, who deserved to be there. They were a very, very good team. So coming back from a 9-point deficit was going to be a lot harder. However, Ole Miss's defense, still led by Pete Golding, who is the defensive coordinator and the head coach, came to play in the second half. And in the third quarter, they only gave up a field goal. And the Rebels outscored Georgia 20-10 in the final quarter. So one of the things I take away from this is this. A thing that isn't a surprise to me, and, if you're simply a blue blood college football enjoyer, you can forget about, you had no idea about this whatsoever. But I did. Wow. Trinidad Chambliss. I mean, bravo to me, Kylan, anyone who has been on the Trinidad Chambliss, it's not a bandwagon because he's been good all season long. Since he's been putting that star in the starting role, he's been great. Not enough people know how good he is. And honestly, I said in the preview show, he's the most dangerous quarterback in college football. And defending him was going to be Georgia's hardest challenge of the whole game. And really, one of the only ways Georgia was going to be able to come away with this win was limiting Trinidad Chambliss's style. So what do I mean by that? It would be a win in Georgia's book if Ole Miss drove them down the field in a conventional way with Kejuan Lacey taking big chunks, 6 to, 5 to 6. I'm not going to say 6-7 there and I already said it, so who cares? But, limiting 6 to 7, or they would be okay with 5 to 6 yard gains on the ground, whatever it may be. They would be okay with that. And then Trinidad Chambliss maybe getting a completion, of 15 to 20 yards max. That was not the case. And honestly, this did not go according to script for Georgia whatsoever. Where Trinidad Chambliss played his brand of football. And what is that brand? It's backyard football. There's a stretch of plays in this matchup where he had to run back. I'm not going to say had to, because he could have stepped up in the pocket and ran forward, but he chose to run backwards. It's one of those plays where you almost sit there and be like, what on earth is he doing? You're yelling at the TV. You're yelling like, Trinidad, turn around and run back to this line of scrimmage. But no, he keeps going farther back. He keeps going farther back, and you're just yelling, no, what are you doing? And then he makes a completion. And then you jump up and celebrate. Like, oh, come on, have a little faith in him the whole time. Frankly, I didn't. But he played that brand of football, backyard football. And there's a span where almost one of them, he almost ran into the back of the, not in the back of the end zone, he almost ran into the end zone just to make a completion of, I think it was 7 yards for a first down. It was 3rd and 7, a big, crucial 3rd and 7. He makes that completion. He's one of those players that probably gives his coaches a heart attack. He probably does. But he pretty much always comes out on top. So we're gonna get into that a little bit more as we talk about the upcoming semifinal matchups. But Chambliss, who is a transfer national champion, coming from the D2 level, transferring from Ferris State, he finishes the game with, I think it was either his best game of the season, yards wise, or his second best. He finishes the game with 362 yards, 2 touchdowns, and on 32 of 46 passing. Wow. What a performance. Kewan Lacey, great rushing attack from him. 2 touchdowns on the day. Obviously giving Trinidad Chambliss and that Charlie Weiss Jr. offense, who Charlie Weiss is a little bit in question. Obviously backing up that performance from Trinidad Chambliss and that passing attack greatly. Good jobs. Kudos to Kewan Lacey. And once again, late in that game, Georgia was put in the situations for them to succeed, and they could have taken that lead late They had an opportunity. I think they were on maybe the 15-yard line. They had a chance to score a touchdown and pretty much put a nail in the coffin with that clock ticking down to 0, with Ole Miss almost never having the chance to get that ball. But they weren't able to do that. And Ole Miss, it wasn't a goal line stand, but they have a very, very good pass breakup. When I think it was about 3rd and 7, great pass breakup. Gunner Stockton intended pass to Lawson Lucky. And great, great poise. Great poise. This speaks to the poise of the Rebels defense and shows that the Golding-led Ole Miss team could definitely be a shoe-in for the national championship game. Because if you think about it, the situation that Ole Miss is in, where they have coaches changing all of the time, Trinidad Chambliss, for instance, players who don't really know if they're going to stay there from season to season, where it's a great example of what uncertainty looks like in college football. And so when you think about that, uncertainty and poised play are not always the same thing. They don't always happen at the same time. However, it did in this circumstance. And that speaks to not only how good this Rebels defense is, but it also just speaks to how good of a leader Pete Golding is for this Ole Miss Rebels team. So knowing that, Ole Miss, I'm going to be picking them going forward. Forget about it. My ESPN College Football Playoff pick'em, I don't know what I was thinking. I picked Georgia to win based on matchups. I think it might have been based on the BTN. We'll get into what the BTN thinks about the semifinal matchups, the remaining bowl games in an upcoming episode. This episode wasn't live streamed. They probably won't be live streamed for the future, considering that we're running on a very, very, very old laptop, which is okay. We will do what we can with the equipment that we have. But knowing that, we'll get into the upcoming matchups, semifinal games of the College Football Playoff. We will do all of that into the coming days, probably maybe Monday or Tuesday of next week. We will have that out there, and we'll get into the top 25 of the BTN, give its input, and whatever it may be. We'll maybe get into some fan questions talking about the quarterfinals, some just questions about college football, the landscape of the sport, whatever it may be. We will do all of those things in coming episodes of the Ben Drury Show. With that being said, I am Ben Drury. Thanks so much for watching today's episode, and have a good rest of your day. Make sure to subscribe. Press that red button down below. It truly, truly helps as we're getting this channel off the ground and running. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Good night.